So John Allen, I represent enterprise and infrastructure portion of Jabil, and give you a little background on myself. I cut my teeth straight out of university on telecom switching racks, the big refrigerator size, 900-pound steel structures, welded, dipped in those awful plating chromates of the time. And I was the young engineer in a factory of older engineers, and I started asking some really tough questions of the senior engineers, things like, why do we not get to see this design until we have to do it? You know, why are these designers in Naperville or wherever it may be doing all this work and sending it to us and telling us we have to stay up all night figuring out how to put it together? Why does the factory not get to talk to the designers? And little did I know that those simple questions would change my life from being destined to be an industrial product manufacturing expert engineer working on a factory floor to essentially 25 years plus now of design for assembly, design analysis, make the better product, cost a better product, decide how to form that relationship. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today will be that relationship. And I may even go one step further back than Joe did in terms of the relationship between a designer and supply chain. And we'll talk to some of that in this presentation today. So now I get to talk about some results. The interesting thing about this results is it doesn't have any numbers. Okay, I've taken away all the numbers, I've taken away all the part numbers, I've taken away a lot. But I think it tells a good story, and that's why I left in this slide. This product, the mystical product 1, is a $50 to $100 full sheet metal chassis. It has average volumes, and by average I'm saying around the 10,000 or less a year. And this slide represents about 3 to 4 months of time. And so I want to point out on this slide, and there's a reason that I showed these 3 times already in my presentation, it's so you'd recognize them on this slide. You have the architect over here and what I call the expert. Okay, within our system architect team is the expert for that tool, for that part, for that system in the industry. Storage. Okay, we have a storage guy to say. Well, in this example 1, what happened was this guy had a dream. He sold the dream, and in his mind he had an idea of what that dream would cost. Makes sense, right? He's the architect. And as it turned out, he would be considered the expert. He threw that over to design, but guess what? He never told them what he thought it should cost. Didn't think he needed to. They're the designers, right? They're going to design it to his spec. It's going to be about this, right? They went off, they did their design. He's assuming things are going good. They got here to supply chain for the EVT, sent it out for quote, had an initial discussion with the supplier, actually is what happened. They sit down with an initial discussion, show them a few things. Supplier comes in and says, I think we're up here somewhere. And this guy came out of his seat because this scale I didn't change. The scale is based on the actual numbers that came back to us. Long about here is when they started talking to me, John, we got to have you, because this guy, the expert, had worked with me in the past and had seen the effects of what could be done. He knew what could be done in the market. And so, as it turned out, they started doing some work with the aPriori team. They got an aPriori number here that timed out along with their first competitive quote. And they actually sent that as a target. Okay, they sent the aPriori first pass estimate as a target to the supplier in the quote. And because there was such a difference here, this guy had gone completely nuts. And so supply chain says, listen, we'll bring in this other supplier too. So they actually sent it to not only the same supplier, but they brought in a second supplier. What was interesting in that is that just by putting this target in the package, look what happened. That was the only difference. Same design, they just put the target in the package. I'm sure there was a phone call or two that was done behind the scenes, but it was interesting. And as you'll see as it plays out along, it's still not to market. It's still changing. aPriori is still going up and down a little. They're still changing the parts a little. We're still arguing about how much PIMs cost and screws and some of that. But at the end of the day, what I want you to see is the expert's still way down here. The suppliers are up here, and isn't it interesting that aPriori is somewhere in the middle? I thought that was kind of interesting. What it tells me is our suppliers are probably still a little fat, and the expert's probably a little out of whack with it.